Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Lots of big updates to get to this morning. Some troubling moves, actually, by Zelensky, banning a bunch of opposition parties. We'll give you the details of what is going on there and why he is doing that. Also, some troubling details out of China. Any sort of hopes we had last week that there may be a little bit of a split between them and Russia, not looking so likely this week. So we will update you there. Also, we'll update for you on the whole Hunter Biden laptop story. So you'll recall the Biden DOJ and the New York Times confirmed the authenticity of the emails on that laptop that during the election had been deemed as having the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Of course, all the spooks who had said that just doubling down or not responding to the story at all. Most of the press not covering it, so we'll give you those updates. Dr. Fauci has emerged to make some comments that are sparking some controversy. We have a wonderful guest on to talk about what is going on with Saudi and Yemen and our complicity in that incredible humanitarian catastrophe. But we wanted to start with the very latest on the ground in Ukraine.
Yeah, so there's been a big proxy fight here in Washington over the last couple of days. Are the Russian forces stalled? Are they not? So we thought we would wade into a little bit of that with our battle updates. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. Some very measured thoughts from Michael Kaufman. He's a respected Russia analyst at CNA, and he has been absolutely spot on about this entire war so far, so we thought we'd bring it to you. He says, quote, "About 2 weeks ago, I suggested Russian forces have 3 weeks before combat effectiveness becomes increasingly exhausted. I think that's generally been right, but we are not quite there yet. The war has broken down in perfectly could be called 3 fronts. Russian advances have stalled out along 2 of them. One of them, which is the front around the city of Kiev, is far from encircled." Now, here's what he gets to, which is that the area to watch in the coming weeks is the Russian attempt in order to encircle Ukrainian forces in the eastern part of the country in a pincer movement. And that would put the Ukrainian military in a very precarious position. In terms of what he thinks in the grand strategic aim, he says, "I think Moscow is searching for something that it can use to declare a victory. Taking the Donbass, having the leverage to attain concessions from Kiev, probably what they're looking to accomplish at this point. This is at best a guess." So that might be an optimistic take, Krystal, because if that's what they can do, they can declare a victory, a quote-unquote victory, declare some sort of concessions, then this will end in a diplomatic stalemate. The other way is that it doesn't end up in a diplomatic stalemate and we enter a full-blown hot conflict. Now, the reason why, though, it's important not to overstate that the Russians have been beat back, they've been stalled completely, is because all of that is part of a proxy war here in Washington as to whether we should ship arms to that country. And unfortunately, that's kind of what we've been seeing on the domestic Washington front with the press declaring a narrative which is not 100% true, which is why I appreciate Michael Kaufman's thoughts so much.
Yeah, so you've probably, if you've been following the news in the past couple of days, you've probably noticed all of a sudden, basically every major news outlet is running with this term stalemate, that the conflict is approaching a stalemate. Let's go ahead and put Axios up on the screen, which, echoes that reporting. Researchers say Russia's invasion is reaching a deadly stalemate. And what that wording and that analysis is being used to justify is, hey, all we need to do is send more weapons in, escalate further the amount of arms that we're shipping in, and perhaps make that, maybe we need longer range drones. Maybe we need to think again about those MiG fighter planes. So let's up the number of weapons that were flooding into Ukraine because they're on the precipice of really being able to push the Russian forces back, and that would force Moscow to the table. So that's what this stalemate analysis is being used to justify. And there are reasons to be skeptical of this. Number one, Russia, yes, has deployed a lot of the forces that they had amassed at the border, but this is not even close to their entire capability.
Yes, exactly.
And so the fear is always, and this is part of what Kaufman says as well, he says, generally I don't see how any military success can add up to something that constitutes a political victory for Moscow. If there is another phase, Russian forces will probably try to compensate for poor performance by inflicting greater destruction. They have much more advanced, and we're going to get to this in a minute, military technology that they could deploy and inflict even greater horrific damage on the civilian population, mass casualties, etc. And so the idea that the Ukrainians have basically like almost won this fight, which is also what the Ukrainian people believe, is just not accurate when you consider the totality of the Russian military capabilities versus what the Ukrainians
I also think people are really misreading what happened here. So the group that put that out is called the Institute for the Study of War.
Yeah.
And very long ago, yours truly was actually an intern at that group, 2015 or so, and some different flirtations of neoconservative foreign policy. But it's important to understand here the ideological bent of the organization. And I don't want to speak ill of a former employer, but I think it's very clear that the two individuals who run the think tank are very much more of advocates for a much more hawkish position and for intervention in the conflict. And I don't think that they would dispute me saying that. Now, it's important to see and understand that when they declare stalemate, they are using a military term. Because if you read their report, he actually says, look, it's actually going to be long and a bloody, protracted campaign. He reminds that the Somme and the Passchendaele conflicts of World War I, where millions of people were killed, those happened in a condition of stalemate. The end of the Civil War, where the most people were killed, that also happened in a position of stalemate. The problem is that the press takes that and runs it as like, oh, it's a total stalemate, it's all good. Actually, no, stalemates are at the time when there can be an escalation, an increase in the number of civilians. Let's go ahead and put this next one up there on the screen, which is another reason. You got to go and probe people's research, where Michael Brendan Doherty, who is a friend of the show, he says, quote, unfortunately, I think ISW, the Institute for the Study of War, is relying exclusively on what the Ukrainian government posts on Facebook, and one author there tends to really overinterpret what they say. I would go with the New York Times for now. So there is a big narrative battle here in Washington as to whether the actual Ukrainians have fought the Russians to a stalemate. Now, it's possible. It could be that they are on a stagnating, part of the front line. That does not mean, though, that the war won't get much worse. And in fact, if you read, their ISW report in the bottom, that's really what they say. So yeah. I think that there's a lot of interpretation games that need to happen here, because if you look at it and say, oh, that's great, that means we need to supply the Ukrainians with even more weapons or offensive weapons. They're going to win this thing. No, that's absolutely not the case. And if anything, this could signal instead an escalation into the worst part of the war, where an easy knockout military victory not attainable, and now we're going to a full-blown civilian bombing campaign.
Yeah,
if there's no diplomatic.
For a long time, we've worried about Russia escalating tactics, given that things did not go for them the way that they expected them to go. I mean, that part is definitely very real, but just be skeptical. I guess the whole point is just be a little skeptical of this narrative, understand the ideological underpinnings that this comes from, understand what it's being used to justify, because the whole sort of narrative around this is the Ukrainians are almost there. We just need to do a little more. We need to give them a little bit more. And so it's, being used to make an argument that we need to escalate the type of weapons and the type of support that we are giving to the Ukrainians.
Yeah, outright military victory by the Ukrainian military, that's just not going to happen.
It's not on the table.
It's not on the table. And they would tell you that. The honest ones would tell you it's absolutely not going to happen. Really what it is that as a defensive force, when you're a smaller defensive force, your main military objective is to make attacking and the offense as painful as humanly possible in order to fight to some sort of diplomatic settlement. And we'll give you the diplomatic settlement in a bit. But the reason why it's important for all of us to have an honest conversation is because Russia is holding back a significant part of its military capability, because they don't want to be even more of a pariah state in the eyes of the world, because it's not necessarily a military necessity at this time. But there is a whole, there are many, many rungs higher on the escalation ladder in the Russian military capability that do not exist. The Ukrainians are fighting to the death with everything that they possibly can. They are throwing everything in terms of a total war against the Russians, but it's not even close to the same on the other side. So really what it comes down to is defeating their political will to continue fighting this war. That may still happen, and there can be a conversation about that, but do not delude yourself into thinking that this is any way over. Hey guys, we're gonna be totally upfront with you. This is the most perilous time that we have ever operated in.
It is so difficult just to try to sort through the news, but even more importantly, to bring you accurate information as this wave of lockdown and censorship spreads across the nation.
Yeah, look, if you can become a premium subscriber today at breakingpoints.com, you're going to help us build out a vibrant, independent media ecosystem, which is free of mainstream pressure. We can't tell you how important that is at a time like this.
Yep, that's right. Go to breakingpoints.com to subscribe. We love you guys, and we appreciate you so much.